Welcome back to A Rogue Theory, where we explore the origins, influences, and playability of your favorite archetypes. Remember to like and subscribe to cast prophetic judgment the next time you play, maybe. Thanks to my Patreon suggesting me archetypes and my Discord community for voting on them every month, today we are covering the Spellbooks of Prophecy and the extended lore from the Magistus, Invoked, and Endymion storylines that directly relate to them. The Spellbooks are comprised of 15 main deck monsters, 3 extra deck monsters, 15 spells, and 1 trap card. While there is seemingly a lot of story to cover, the benefit of this longtime favorite archetype is that the Spellbooks were chosen to have their storyline made canon in Master Guide 4 and extended in Master Guide 6 to tie into the idea of a magical nation, where all your favorite spellcaster archetypes lived and belonged. Granted, whether that's a peaceful existence or even canon anymore is in debate since the reveal of the Magistus archetype. Thankfully though, the Spellbook storyline is more of a side story and is yet to be rewritten by the addition of the Magistus archetype, which introduced politics, rivalries, and feuds between the 3 major factions. For the Spellbook storyline, there's a few things that you need to know. One is that Alistair is most likely the person who created the Spellbook Tower to practice his experiments and gather about knowledge. When one experiment goes wrong, he ends up merging with one of the gods or spirits he summons. This leaves him in a coma state, but brimming with magical power, and those who are left in charge of the tower decide to hook him up as a battery source instead of, I don't know, doing literally anything else with his body. 2. The Spellbook Tower acts as a library for all magicians who choose to visit it, with restrictive archives that can only be accessed by members of the tower. While the library is split up into 2 sections, one focused on history, medicine, and basic technology, available to the public, the Library of the Crescent is exclusive to only the members of the tower, focusing on the study of combat and lifelong quests. Think Philosopher's Stones, immortality, and summoning beasts from a different dimension. 3. Due to the nature of paper text almost never being updated, everything within the tower is recorded and updated through the use of magic. But in turn, the gems within the books that act as a pseudo-power source record not only the data and research of those who use them, but also oddly siphon the magical power from them, transmitting it to the basement and automatically updating its own archives with new or different data results. Alright, with that out of the way, the king of the magical citadel, Endymion, attacks the Spellbook Tower, attempting to take it under his own control, because he believes that magic and technology shouldn't be accessed by the public. The magicians attempt to stop him, and the Fool of Prophecy tries to join in the fight. But while he wields the Spellbook of the Master, a dark magic attacks him from within the book and possesses him, taking over his body and soul, much like Alistair.
Coincidence? I think not!
While his new form causes many to die and even make the forces of Endymion retreat from their war against the Spellbook Tower, his body cannot handle the new source of magic inside of himself, and his body begins to shut down. However, the top 2 spellcasters of the tower attempt to spell to save his life and purge the evil within. Successful, he transforms from the Reaper of Souls into an angel. And that is where the story ends as we know it.
Wait a minute, this is how it ends? There's so many questions left unanswered.
Making, in my opinion, for a rather disappointing conclusion. While we can draw ties to the idea that Alistair, whoever is in control of Alistair's mind, is slowly siphoning power and is the one to infest the Fool of Prophecy's mind, it was clearly not the intention to originally write it this way upon its release. Now, while we will either get a very complicated rewrite of the story or a further explanation in a later edition of the Master Guide, it's obvious that perhaps the Tower, or those of its surviving members, will appear in the final conclusion of the feuds of the Magistus. But for now, all we can do is patiently wait for further support cards and for Spellbook of Judgment to finally come off the ban list. Okay, before we get into the card-by-card analysis, the Spellbook cards fall into 2 categories, those that are playable and those that are dumpster trash. The cards that I'm going to list right now aren't worth your time and won't be covered in this video, but feel free to look them up in your own time. Fool of Prophecy, Reaper of Prophecy, Amours of Prophecy, Chariot of Prophecy, Emperor of Prophecy, Hermit of Prophecy, Strength of Prophecy, Prophecy Destroyer, Wheel of Prophecy, Empress of Prophecy, Hierophant of Prophecy, Spellbook Library of the Helosphere, and Hidden Spellbook. Now that we've covered all the cards that aren't worth shit, we can finally get on to what makes this archetype viable as a competitive option. Spellbook Magician of Prophecy is probably the only card you can reliably count on since it grabs you any Spellbook spell card from your deck. While intended to be played in his own archetype to maximize efficiency of play with Spellbook of Judgment, rest in peace, he provides any deck that he's in consistency by thinning the deck and inevitably allowing it to draw 2 cards. Temperance of Prophecy is arguably one of the better Spellbook-based cards in a mixed variant since it can summon a dark or light spellcaster from the deck, possibly allowing for further combo plays, but sadly it won't provide you much in the way of its own archetype since it can't capitalize on the restriction of being locked out of level 5 or higher monsters. Justice of Prophecy is an end-phase double searcher that's important in slower formats that lack OTK potential and often lead to a grind game, but she falls short of being dependable thanks to the current pace of combo decks that require multiple negates to stop them. However, thanks to the addition of Fleur de Lis, she has the potential to come back into the metagame, assuming that she's paired with Dogmatica. High Priestess of Prophecy. While traditionally the boss monster of the deck, the fact that her removal and summon is often dependent on having set up the previous turn means that you don't want to open her in your opening hand. Because of this, I really don't think she's that good. World of Prophecy. While an often effective board wipe can win you the game, requiring 4 cards in hand to activate said effect leaves too much to be desired. Yet while it also has the ability to add back 2 Spellbook cards from the graveyard, the fact that you can't special summon monsters the turn you activate said effect, besides itself, means you aren't oftentimes winning the game on this alone. Crowley the First Prophesier is definitively one of the best parts of this entire archetype, thanks to helping the deck have another way to search out its utility spell cards from the deck and perform summons of high-level monsters without losing to Ash Blossom or requiring multiple spellbook cards as reveals or their preemptive use. The Grand Spellbook Tower is meant to provide the archetype with the desperate advantage and recursion that it needs when competing against other decks, but unlike other field spells, it doesn't provide any immediate or on-field advantage. Instead, it benefits the archetype by allowing itself to act as a +1 every single turn after the original activation. Thankfully, it comes with a neat backup effect in case it gets destroyed preemptively. Spellbook of Secrets. While most archetypes have cards that act as searchers for combo pieces, due to the odd naming convention for this archetype, this card instead searches for you your utility-based interactions. While it could have obviously been better, personally I see it as just being both good and bad enough to escape the ban list. If it isn't clear, you should be playing 3 of this. Spellbook of Knowledge is probably one of the more famous engine pieces for the Spellbook archetype, since it can act as draw power within many different spellcaster decks. While it technically doesn't net you any advantage on its own, in some decks it has the power to thin and dig for combo pieces or outs to difficult situations. Spellbook of the Master is meant to copy the important effects of your other cards and bypass the restriction of the archetype's once per turn effects. While its uses can range from anywhere between more draw, search, or added power, it falls short of being truly effective since it requires some setup to be used. In my opinion, I wouldn't recommend more than one in any given deck. Spellbook of Fate is the deck's only true form of disruption. While it has the capability to end an opponent's turn when timed correctly, it will oftentimes suffer from a lack of cards to banish when attempting to use its multiple effects. Due to this, I wouldn't recommend running more than 2 copies of this card in your deck. Spellbook of Judgment. While it's understandable to the reason why this card was banned in the past, I wouldn't say that it still deserves to remain on the ban list, since many decks can put up multiple negates and easily perform OTKs to the point that the advantage gained is irrelevant. However, I can understand why Konami would fear the release of Judgment. I mean, after all, Slifer the Sky Dragon is the greatest god. Spellbook Library of the Crescent had its place in the meta long ago, but due to the format evolving and getting faster, many builds can no longer run this card, as being locked out of other spell cards is simply just bad. Spellbook of Eternity is meant to retrieve your banished spellbooks that were used as the cost for Fate's effect. While it's good in that it can add back whatever you targeted, Eternity's main purpose is to help facilitate the cycle of searching Spellbook of Fate by adding back Spellbook of Secrets and attempting to further disrupt your opponent. Outside of this, it doesn't have any other uses or applications. Spellbook of Wisdom is an archetypal version of Forbidden Lance. Now, while it isn't as good or generic since you have to choose whether to dodge your opponent's spells or traps, it is searchable and doesn't reduce your monster's attack points. Spellbook Star Hall. Honestly, this is one of the weird cards that could have been on the list at the beginning since it doesn't have a place in the meta anymore. While it was previously used to boost and protect your cards, its historical use was meant to stop your opponent from special summoning by protecting Jowgen the Spiritualist and putting both players under a restrictive clause. Due to how the meta has shaped up, neither Jowgen nor Star Hall is worth playing anymore. Spellbook of Life, for all intents and purposes, is a monster born that requires you to have minimal graveyard set up. While it's a nice addition to a decent lineup of utility-based cards, it also can oddly modulate levels and benefit decks that plan to special summon XYZ monsters. Spellbook of Power interestingly acts as another way to thin your deck and search for effective resources to deal with your opponent. While the attack gain might seem rather niche, copying this card with Spellbook of the Master means you can double search and get a boosted 2k attack on your monsters. Spellbook of Miracles has the potential to be the strongest card for all spellcaster-based archetypes. However, it's punished by a lack of decent spellcaster XYZ monsters that are worth summoning back to the field and can take advantage of the banished to graveyard to banished again recursion that Miracle can provide. Okay, now that we know all the cards that are currently released for the archetype, the effects of each card, and the convoluted story of the spellbooks and their possible basement-dwelling controller, we can finally speak to the competitive viability of this archetype. Spellbooks and/or Prophecy as a solo archetype will never strive or see competitive competitive success without the help of other archetypes. While the spellbooks boost a competitive edge for all spellcaster-based decks, they currently suffer from having their most important card banned and having a disturbing lack of spellbook-named monsters. For combos today, there isn't anything I can show you except the use of the spellbook engine, which takes advantage of the archetypal names and effects to thin your deck by 4 cards off of 1 normal summon. Here's the list that I'm currently playing around with. While most other decks can splash in Dogmatica at the cost of some restriction, Spellbooks manage to give the deck a way to access further consistency and strong disruption that's currently effective against the entire metagame thanks to the inclusion of Spellbook of Fate. While I'm certain that every deck has its place in the game, make sure to reserve your judgment for when it comes back. No Dragon Link will ever be safe again. Make sure to get your copies of Dante before he's gone at the end of April. Thanks for being patient with me. I've been a bit delayed trying to get some merch out, but hopefully I should be back on track within the next 3 releases. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. This is Rogue Theory, passing turn.